The breaking point. Colonel Harrison Vance slammed his hand on the table so hard the coffee cups rattled to the floor. "She doesn't belong on this range," he said, his voice cutting through the desert air like a blade. "I don't care what her file says. A logistics officer pulling a trigger on my range over my dead body." He turned to the men around him, his lip curled into something between contempt and amusement. 13 Navy SEALs couldn't hit that target, and now we're letting the supply clerk try? The laughter that followed was ugly. It was the kind of laugh that had ended careers, the kind that had broken people. But Captain Harper Connelly had heard that laugh before, and she had already decided it would never break her again. A quick note. If this kind of story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Harper's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling us what city you were watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The heat of Fort Carver. The morning started the way most mornings at Fort Carver did, with dust, diesel fumes, and the low rumble of heavy engines hauling equipment across the base perimeter. The Arizona sun had already climbed high enough to make the air shimmer above the asphalt. The temperature on the southern range was hovering near 94 degrees and relentlessly climbing. Captain Harper Connelly noticed none of it. She was hours into her shift, reviewing supply manifests for a shipment of communications equipment that had gone missing somewhere between a warehouse in Tucson and the secondary depot at the base's eastern edge. A cold, untouched coffee mug sat on her desk. With a pen tucked behind her ear and a highlighter in hand, she cross-referenced 2 separate inventory logs with the quiet, focused intensity of someone who understood that details were never small. Details were the difference between a mission succeeding and men dying in the field, waiting for equipment that never arrived. She was a seasoned soldier in the prime of her life, with over a decade of service in the Army. She possessed a face that people described as serious. Not unfriendly, just serious. It was the kind of face that didn't smile unless there was genuinely something worth smiling about. Her hair was pulled tightly back, her uniform was flawlessly pressed, and her boots were pristine. None of that would matter in just a few hours. Later that morning, her radio crackled. It was Sergeant First Class Garrett Sullivan, her logistics NCO. He was a good man, reliable, with decades in the service, and still capable of surprising her. "Captain Connelly," he said, his voice carrying that particular edge he got when something unusual was unfolding on base. "You might want to come down to Range 7. She looked up from her manifest. "Why?" General Clayton Sterling is out there. He's got the SEAL sniper team running qualifications. Something's happening. She paused. Something. Yeah. 13 of them all missed the 4,000-meter mark. The general is not happy. Harper was quiet for a moment. Her pen moved slightly between her fingers, a small rotation, a habit she'd had since she was a young girl, something she did when she was thinking deeply about something she wasn't sure she should say out loud. "I'll be there shortly," she said. She didn't tell Sullivan why. She didn't tell anyone. The impossible range. Range 7 was the longest qualification range on the installation. It stretched out from a raised firing line across a flat expanse of desert scrub and heat-blasted rock until it terminated at a target set nearly 4 kilometers away. At that distance, the target was invisible to the naked eye. It existed only as a set of coordinates, a mathematical problem dressed up to look like an object. The conditions on that range were never kind. The heat distortion alone could bend a shooter's perception enough to throw a round several feet off course. And on a day like today, with the wind shifting unpredictably out of the southwest and the temperature still rising, it was the kind of range that separated genuine craft from everything else. 13 men had already stood on that firing line. 13 of them had gone through the calculations, settled into their positions, controlled their breathing, and squeezed their triggers. 13 of them had waited the long, agonizing seconds it took for a bullet to travel that distance. and 13 of them had heard the range officer's radio crackle with the same flat, deflating report miss. General Clayton Sterling stood behind the firing line with his arms crossed and his jaw set in a way that his staff had learned to recognize. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was something colder than anger. It was disappointment folded inside frustration, and the combination of those two things in a man like Sterling was far more unsettling than a raised voice. He was a veteran of many decades. He had the kind of face that had been weathered by things most people only read about. Multiple combat tours, classified operations in hostile territories that he was legally forbidden to discuss. He had lost men. He had written agonizing letters to their families. He had stood at grave sites in full dress uniform, rendering honors to flag-draped caskets, while holding himself together with the sheer force of professional discipline. He was not a man easily impressed, nor was he easily discouraged. But standing there watching his 13th shooter pick himself up off the mat without a confirmed hit, something in Sterling quietly shifted. "This is it," he said, not directing the question at anyone in particular. "This is the best we've got." Colonel Harrison Vance, the installation commander, and Sterling's host for the day, cleared his throat. Vance was a man whose career had been built on appearing to be exactly the right size for whatever room he was in. "Sir, the conditions today are exceptional. The crosswind is—" "I know what the crosswind is, Harrison." Sterling's voice was quiet. That was always the warning sign. "I also know that the conditions our enemies operate in are not going to be negotiated in advance." Vance nodded carefully. "Yes, sir." Sterling turned back to the range. The distant target was invisible to him, but he stared in its direction anyway, as if he could will it into focus through sheer determination. That was when he heard the footsteps. The supply clerk steps up. Harper had not intended to make an entrance. She had walked down to Range 7 the way she walked everywhere, directly at a pace that suggested she had somewhere to be. She had signed in at the control point, shown her credentials to the sergeant on duty, and walked to the observation area. She had fully planned to stand there, quietly, watch, and leave without saying a single word. She had not planned for Colonel Vance to notice her. "Connelly." His voice was sharp. "What are you doing out here? This is a closed qualification event." Several men on the firing line turned to look at her. Harper recognized some of them. She'd processed equipment requests for a few of the SEAL teams and knew their faces from briefings. Their expressions ranged from mild curiosity to the specific kind of condescension that comes naturally to men who have decided without investigation that a person is not worth their attention. "I'm observing, sir," Harper said, her voice perfectly even. "My credentials were cleared at the gate." "Your credentials are for range access during training hours. This is—" "Colonel." General Sterling had turned around. He looked at Harper with the same measuring gaze he turned on everything. Not unfriendly, not warm, simply assessing. "Do I know you, Captain?" "No, sir," Harper said. "I don't believe we've met directly." "What's your role on this installation?" "Logistics, sir. Supply chain management and equipment coordination." Sterling nodded slowly. "Logistics." He looked at her the way he'd looked at the distant target a moment ago. "You heard about our problem out here?" "I heard the radio traffic, sir." "Yes. And you came to watch." There was a pause. In those brief seconds, something happened inside Harper Connelly that she had been suppressing for a very long time. A door that she kept locked because it was safer, because the things behind it were complicated and painful, shifted just slightly on its hinges. "No, sir," she said. "I came to shoot." The silence that followed was so complete that Harper could hear the wind moving across the desert scrub 50 yards to her left. Then Vance laughed. It was the dismissive, ugly laugh she'd expected, echoed quietly by a few men at the firing line. "Captain." Vance said, his tone shifting into something that was almost gentle, the way condescension sometimes masks itself as patience. These are Navy SEAL snipers. These are men with hundreds of hours of long-range marksmanship training. They couldn't make this shot today. What exactly makes you think? Permission to speak freely, sir. Harper looked at General Sterling, ignoring Vance entirely. Sterling studied her for a moment, then grunted. With respect, what I think isn't the variable. Either I can make the shot or I can't. The only way to find out is to let me try. She paused. If I miss, nothing changes. You've lost nothing except a couple of minutes. Another silence. Around them, the desert held its breath. What rifle do you want? Sterling asked. Mine, sir, if I can go back to my vehicle. Vance stepped forward. General, with respect, I really don't think this is... Harrison. Sterling's voice was still quiet. Please stop talking. The math and the mechanics. It took Harper only a brief moment to retrieve her case. When she returned, she was carrying a worn, olive-drab rifle case, the kind that told you it had been somewhere. She set it on the bench and opened it without ceremony. Inside lay a .338 Lapua Magnum bolt-action rifle, a platform capable of confirmed kills at extreme ranges. This one had been carefully modified over the years. A custom barrel, a specialized scope, and a trigger assembly adjusted to a brake that Harper had spent countless hours training her hands to trust. It was not standard issue. It was something she had built and maintained in private, the way some people keep journals. A piece of herself she rarely showed. One of the SEAL snipers, a senior chief named Gallagher, a man with a legendary combat record, looked at the rifle and finally spoke. That's an old platform. Yes, Harper said. The newer systems have better ballistic compensators for this kind of range. I know, Harper said, attaching her suppressor. I prefer this one. Gallagher watched her hands. In a voice more honest than his earlier expression suggested, he asked, You've shot at this range before. Not this range specifically, Harper replied. Similar conditions elsewhere. He held her gaze. Some unspoken recognition passed between them, and Gallagher stepped back, crossing his arms to wait. It was more courtesy than anyone else was showing. Harper settled into the firing position. For the first few minutes, she did nothing that looked like shooting. She lay still, listening to the wind and watching the heat shimmer. Opening a small spiral notebook filled with graph paper, she made precise calculations in pencil. Wind speed at the firing line. Wind speed at the midpoint, estimated by watching desert grass movement far out. Temperature, humidity, and the Coriolis effect, correction for a 4,000-meter shot at this latitude. Over that distance, the bullet would drop nearly 860 feet, a number that felt like fiction to anyone who hadn't done the math. What's she writing? Someone whispered behind her. Her will, someone else mocked. Quiet laughter rippled. Harper's pencil didn't stop moving. When she finished, she adjusted her position. Elbow placement, body angle, stock elevation. She pressed her cheek against the rifle and found the target in her optic. Even magnified, it danced like a mirage. She breathed in, out. In, out. The range was absolutely silent. She exhaled half a breath and held it. She squeezed the trigger. The report was a heavy crack that rolled out across the desert. The rifle pushed into her shoulder with controlled authority as the round left the barrel at nearly 900 meters per second. And then they waited. At 4,000 meters, a bullet needs time. It arcs, it falls, it fights the wind, gravity, and the rotation of the earth itself. It travels for long, agonizing seconds. The radio in the range officer's hand crackled. No one breathed. Impact. The range officer's voice reported flat and entirely certain. Center mass. Confirmed hit. For a few heartbeats, nobody moved. Then Gallagher spoke quietly and with profound sincerity. Holy God. The spell broke. Men reacted with stunned silence or involuntary gasps. One younger SEAL candidate literally spun in a circle as if needing to confirm the universe was still functioning.
General Sterling stood perfectly still. Vance sputtered. The equipment. There must be something wrong with the target verification system. Run it again.
The system is functioning normally, the range officer replied. The shot was confirmed by 2 independent sensors. Run it again, Vance repeated. Harper was already rising. She dusted off her uniform with a single efficient motion and packed her rifle with unhurried calm. Her hands were perfectly steady. Sterling crossed the space between them and stopped in front of her. The measuring quality in his eyes had shifted into something entirely new. Captain Connelly, how long have you been doing this? A while, sir. That's not an answer. No, sir, it's not. She looked at him directly. Do you want the real answer, or the answer that fits this context? Let's start with this context. For years, she said, since I was young. I taught myself the mathematics first, then the mechanics. I've been practicing on civilian ranges off base for most of my career, in secret. The Army wasn't exactly offering me a spot on a sniper team, sir.
Sterling absorbed the blunt truth without flinching.
There's something else. The way you moved when you set up that shot. That's not just range training. Where have you shot in conditions like this? The wind moved across the range. Harper spoke quietly. Afghanistan, sir. The word landed with heavy weight.
Afghanistan.
Sterling repeated a memory turning over in his mind. Multiple deployments, sir, though not in any role officially documented as marksmanship. Sterling studied her carefully. Kunar province, years ago. My team was compromised, pinned in a ravine for hours. Then suddenly 3 combatants who had us penned were removed from the equation, from an elevated position no one had secured. We never identified the shooter. We assumed it was a CIA asset.
Harper looked at him, her expression dead serious.
Yes, sir. That's a reasonable assumption. Sterling looked at the logistics officer in front of him for a long time. Then, without hesitation, he brought his hand up to the brim of his cap in a full, formal salute. Captain Connelly, he said. Harper stood straight and returned the salute. She accepted it with the equanimity of someone who had long since stopped needing the world's permission to know her own worth. Thank you, sir. The bureaucracy of truth. The salute lasted only seconds, but it sent a shockwave through the men on the line. Gallagher stepped forward, immediately extending his hand. Chief Petty Officer Gallagher, that was the best shot I've ever seen in person, and you deserve to hear it. Several other men stepped forward. Colonel Vance was not among them. He was already mentally drafting the bureaucratic incident report to contain this narrative. Harrison, Sterling said, noticing Vance's silence. You have something you want to say. Vance cleared his throat. I think we need to talk about protocols, sir. Captain Connelly's participation wasn't authorized through proper channels. There are liability considerations. She made the shot, Sterling countered. The process failed 13 times this morning. Let's have a careful conversation about what that process is actually protecting. Vance looked like a man who had hit a locked door. Gallagher broke the tension, asking the question everyone was thinking. Captain Connelly, how many shots have you taken at this range or beyond in field conditions? Live fire.
Harper looked at him.
Several confirmed, a few probable. The number sat uncomfortably in the air. Extreme range, field conditions. Where? Gallagher asked softly. 3 locations. I'm not going to give specifics right now. Sterling stepped closer, dropping his voice. Kunar province was one of them. You were there. In what official capacity? Officially attached to logistics. Unofficially, sir, I was doing what needed to be done. Sterling thought of his compromised team. We were going to lose people that day. Then in less than a minute, the shooters pinning us were gone. Clean shots. 6 men came home from that ravine, sir, Harper said softly. 5 men came home, Sterling corrected, his voice tight. Sergeant First Class Elias Stanton, died of his wounds days later. Harper's eyes tightened. I know about Sergeant Stanton. I followed up on all of you. There was an old, disciplined grief in her voice.
Sterling watched her. Who authorized your deployments?
I can't answer that on this range, sir. Come to my office later that afternoon, Sterling instructed. We'll talk. The weight of 4 names. Harper spent the hours before the meeting completing her supply manifests. The numbers had to be right. The mission always continued. But in the quiet of her mind, 4 names moved in the dark.
Malik Washington,
Wyatt Holden,
Donovan Hayes,
Mateo Cruz. They weren't ghosts. They were a weight she chose to carry, because setting them down felt like an abandonment they didn't deserve. When she finally entered Sterling's temporary office, he skipped the pleasantries. Vance is filing a formal complaint about your unauthorized weapon and presence on the range, Sterling informed her. I know. I'm concerned, but I'm not surprised. Sterling leaned forward. Tell me about the 4 you lost. The abruptness of the question startled her. He had been digging. Harper took a long breath, finally letting the heavy weight rest in the open space between them. Malik Washington, Wyatt Holden, Donovan Hayes, Mateo Cruz, she said, giving each name its full dignity. They were my team, unofficially. We hit an ambush at a choke point in Kunar. The intelligence was bad. I was in an elevated position and took out 3 of the ambush team, but the other 2 reached the vehicle before I could re-engage. She stared at the desk. It wasn't my failure, but I am not done carrying it. What I can do is make sure my knowledge, the math, the patience gets passed on, so the next time someone is trapped with bad intel, there are better shooters on the ridges. Sterling opened a desk drawer and slid a folder toward her. This is a proposal. It establishes a new, independent, long-range marksmanship program. It needs a lead instructor who understands the math and what it costs when we fail. Harper opened the folder. On the dedication line, she saw the 4 names of her fallen team. A profound, complicated emotion washed over her. The profound relief of a burden finally being acknowledged by someone else. I'll need assurances about independence from Vance's command, she said steadily. I'll get them. The Inquisition. The next few days were a blur of bureaucratic warfare. Anonymous phone calls warned Harper that powerful people wanted her record kept quiet. They preferred her to remain a neat, tidy secret, a logistics officer who got lucky. Vance pushed his formal review, overseen by Colonel Sylvia Vargas, a fiercely thorough JAG officer. During the hearing, an uninvited civilian named Arthur Whitmore tried to intimidate Harper into silence, citing chains of authority and institutional clarity. Harper didn't blink. I have nothing to hide. I have things I've been prevented from making visible. Just as Vance thought he had the upper hand, Sterling's aide burst into the room and handed Colonel Vargas a document. Vargas read it, her pen completely still. General Sterling, Vargas announced to the stunned room, has submitted a declassification request for Captain Connelly's operational record, countersigned by 2 flag officers. He has also submitted a letter of commendation. Whitmore looked furious. Vance went pale. Harper simply breathed out, realizing that the variables were finally out of her hands, and she was entirely at peace with it. The Reckoning. Before dawn the next morning, Harper's phone rang. It was Lieutenant General Evelyn Mercer, a legend in the Army, known for her ruthless precision. Mercer was the officer who had originally signed off on the disastrous Kunar operation. They met in a barren conference room. Mercer didn't offer excuses. I signed the authorization that put your team in that choke point, Mercer said bluntly. I am sorry, Captain. It's not sufficient, but it is true. To hear a lieutenant general offer a genuine apology was staggering. Mercer then laid out the battle plan. Whitmore was protecting an active operation and wanted Harper silenced. To beat him, They needed the ultimate signature, General Vivian Carter, the Army Chief of Staff.
I have her signature, Mercer revealed. The declassification is happening. The training program is yours, and you are being awarded the Bronze Star with Valor. But most importantly, the official record regarding your 4 men is being corrected.
Harper's chest tightened. She learned that the men's families had been told they died in a routine training accident. A lie to protect the bureaucracy.
Where do I sign? Harper asked, picking up her pen. When the ink dried, the truth was finally free. Vance was immediately reassigned to a frozen outpost in Alaska. Whitmore was neutralized. The shadows were burned away.
A new horizon. Later that afternoon, Chief Gallagher knocked on Harper's door. Standing beside him was a young, nervous SEAL candidate.
This is Petty Officer 2nd Class Cameron Stanton, Gallagher introduced.
Harper felt a jolt. Stanton, Elias Stanton's nephew. The young man stood tall. I didn't know who you were yesterday, but my family was told my uncle died in a training accident. My aunt blamed herself for years. Harper looked him dead in the eye. Your uncle was in Kunar province because he believed in what he was doing. He was incredibly brave. What happened to him was the consequence of bad decisions made high up the chain, not a random accident. Your family is going to get the full truth. Cameron nodded, fighting back emotion. I also want to apply for your new program, ma'am.
Harper studied him.
Do you understand that the shot is the very last thing? That everything before it, the math, the patience, is what actually matters?
Yes, ma'am.
Put in your application. After they left, Harper received a phone call from Nora Stanton Elias's widow. For 20 minutes, Harper listened to a woman unburden herself from years of hollow lies, finally hearing that her husband's sacrifice had profound meaning. When the call ended, Harper opened her private notebook. Beneath the 4 names she had carried for so many years, she wrote a single new line. Their families will know the truth. Weeks later, Harper returned to Range 7 alone. The dawn air was crisp. She set up her rifle, calculated the wind, the humidity, the drop. She fired 1 shot.
Confirmed hit.
She packed up her rifle and looked out over the vast, shimmering desert. Soon the recruits would arrive. She was going to teach them the math, the mechanics, and the agonizing patience required to do the impossible. She was going to ensure that the next time someone was pinned down in a dark ravine, a guardian angel would be waiting on the ridge. She walked off the range with a steady heart. The waiting was finally over. The real work had just begun.